David wiped down the same lab table for the third time that evening. The scientist had left hours ago, but he stayed behind, moving slowly through the empty corridors of the Nexus Research Institute. To anyone watching, he looked like just another night janitor doing his job. But David was paying attention to things that most people would ignore. He had been working at this place for almost 2 years now, every night. He cleaned the same labs, emptied the same trash cans, and mopped the same floors. The researchers barely noticed him. They would walk past him like he wasn't even there. Some would nod politely, but most just ignored him completely. This was exactly what David wanted. Tonight felt different, though, as he emptied the waste basket in Dr. Rodriguez's office. He noticed something strange, mixed in with the usual. Papers and coffee cups were fragments of what looked like metal, but it wasn't like any metal he had ever seen. It was almost transparent and seemed to change color when he moved it under the light. David carefully wrapped the pieces in a paper towel and slipped them into his cleaning cart. This wasn't the first weird thing he had found. Over the past few weeks, David had been collecting odd items from the trash. There were papers with symbols that didn't look like any language he knew. He found small electronic devices that definitely weren't made by any company he recognized. And there were photographs of things that didn't look quite right, almost like animals, but wrong somehow. David had learned to be careful about these discoveries. He never took anything during the day when people were around. He never asked questions. He just collected what he found and studied it later at home. His apartment was starting to look like a detective's office, with photos and documents spread across his kitchen table. The thing that really caught his attention was Dr. Rodriguez herself. She was the head of the xenobiology department, and everyone said she was brilliant. She had written dozens of research papers and gave talks at conferences all over the world. But David had started to notice things about her that didn't seem normal. First, he had never seen her eat anything. Not once in 2 years. The other scientists would gather in the break room for lunch, but Dr. Rodriguez never joined them. When there were office parties or celebrations, she would hold a plate of food but never actually eat it. David had watched her carefully, and he was sure she wasn't eating. Then there was the way she moved. Most people have little habits. They tap their fingers, shift their weight, or fidget with their hair. Dr. Rodriguez never did any of these things. She moved like someone who had to think about each action. When she walked, her steps were perfectly even. When she sat down, she positioned herself exactly the same way every time. David also noticed that she only worked at night. During the day, her office was always empty. Her assistant would tell people that Dr. Rodriguez was in meetings or working from home. But David knew better. He had seen her car in the parking lot after midnight. He had seen the lights on in her lab when everyone else had gone home. The most strange thing was the way she talked to certain people. David had good hearing, and he had learned to work quietly so people forgot he was there. Sometimes he would hear Dr. Rodriguez talking to other researchers in whispers. The conversations didn't make sense. They would use words that sounded like they belonged in a science fiction movie. They talked about the harvest and the preparation and the signal from home. David had been trained to notice these kinds of patterns before he came to America. He had worked for his country's intelligence service. He was good at watching people and figuring out what they were really up to. But after some trouble back home, he had to leave everything behind and start over. The job as a janitor was perfect because it let him stay invisible while he figured out his next move. But now he was starting to think that maybe his old skills were needed again. The things he was seeing at the Institute didn't add up. There were too many strange coincidences. Too many things that didn't make sense. And Dr. Rodriguez was at the center of all of it. David decided to start keeping better records. He bought a small camera and started taking pictures of the weird items he found. He made notes about Dr. Rodriguez's schedule and the people she met with. He even started learning some of the symbols he kept finding in the trash. One night, while he was cleaning the hallway outside Dr. Rodriguez's office, he heard voices inside. This was unusual because it was almost 3 in the morning. David moved closer to the door and listened carefully. There were at least 3 people in the room, and they were speaking in whispers. But these weren't normal whispers. The sounds were different, like they were coming from throats that weren't quite human. David pressed his ear against the door. The conversation was in a language he didn't recognize, but the tone was serious, almost urgent. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. One of the voices said something in English. The others are becoming suspicious. We need to move faster. Another voice replied, the human workers are no threat. They see nothing because they expect nothing. We are safe as long as we maintain our appearances during the day. David's heart started beating faster. He carefully moved away from the door and continued cleaning, but his mind was racing. What did they mean by human workers? Why did they talk about maintaining appearances? And most importantly, who were the others? As he finished his shift that night, David realized that his quiet life was about to become very complicated. Whatever was happening at the Nexus Research Institute, it was bigger than strange trash and weird schedules. And somehow, he had stumbled into the middle of it. The next morning, David sat at his kitchen table looking at all the evidence he had collected. The metal fragments, the strange symbols, the photographs of impossible things. Everything pointed to one conclusion that seemed crazy but was starting to feel more and more real. Dr. Rodriguez and some of the other researchers weren't exactly what they appeared to be. And David, the invisible janitor that everyone ignored, might be the only one who knew their secret. After hearing that strange conversation through Dr. Rodriguez's office door, David knew he had to dig deeper. But he also knew he had to be smarter about it. These people were dangerous, and if they caught him snooping around, his simple janitor act wouldn't save him. The next few weeks became a careful game of cat and mouse. David started paying closer attention to schedules and patterns. He noticed that Dr. Rodriguez and her inner circle only met late at night, usually after 2 in the morning. During the day, they acted like normal scientists, but David could see the cracks in their performance. Dr. Wilson from the genetics lab never blinked. David had started counting, and in 30 minutes of watching him, Dr. Wilson blinked exactly 3 times. Normal people blink about 15 times per minute. Dr. Harrison from biochemistry always walked in perfectly straight lines, never veering even slightly to avoid obstacles. And Dr. Chen from the physics department, David was pretty sure that wasn't even her real name because she pronounced it wrong. David also started mapping out the building in a way he had never done before. As a janitor, he had access to almost everywhere, but now he was looking for hidden areas and restricted zones. He found rooms that weren't on any of the building plans, corridors that led to dead ends that shouldn't exist, and elevators that had buttons for floors that officially didn't exist. One night, while cleaning the 3rd floor, David discovered something that made his blood run cold. He was emptying trash cans when he found a personnel file that someone had thrown away. It contained photos and information about government officials from Washington, D.C. But these weren't normal personnel files. Each photo showed 2 versions of the same person, one labeled original and one labeled replacement. David recognized some of the faces. Senator Williams, who had been on the news just last week talking about defense spending. General Peterson, who ran the military's research division. Dr. Foster, who advised the president on scientific matters. According to the file, all of them had been successfully processed over the past 6 months. That's when David realized the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just some weird research project. These people were systematically replacing important figures in the government and military. And if they could replace senators and generals, they could replace anyone. David started taking bigger risks. He began staying later and exploring areas that were supposed to be off-limits. He used his master key to access restricted floors and photograph everything he could find. What he discovered was like something out of a nightmare. On the basement level, hidden behind a door marked storage, David found what looked like a medical facility. There were operating tables, strange machines that hummed with energy, and tanks filled with liquid that glowed with an eerie blue light. The walls were covered with charts showing human anatomy. but with notes and modifications written in that alien language. The most disturbing part was a row of what looked like hospital beds. Each bed had restraints, and next to each bed was a tank containing what appeared to be a human body floating in liquid. David realized with horror that these might be the originals, the real people, who had been replaced died in another room. David found the communication center he had suspected existed. Banks of computers and screens showed locations all over the world. David could see surveillance footage from government buildings, military bases, and research facilities in dozens of countries. This operation was much bigger than just the United States, but the most shocking discovery came when David found a room full of what he could only describe as copies. They looked like people, but they were all identical, gray-skinned beings with large black eyes and elongated fingers. Some were in what looked like cocoons, while others were standing in glass chambers filled with that same blue liquid dot as David watched. One of the chambers opened, and a gray being stepped out, but as it moved toward a chair in the center of the room, its appearance began to change. The gray skin shifted to a normal human color. The large eyes became smaller and brown. The elongated fingers shortened to normal proportions. Within minutes, the being looked exactly like someone David recognized, Dr. Kim from the engineering department. David realized he was watching the creation of a replacement. These beings could somehow copy the appearance of any human, and they were using this ability to infiltrate every level of society. But David also noticed something important. The transformation process seemed to require a lot of energy. The beings looked tired after changing, and they had to rest in special chairs that were connected to the strange machines. This might be a weakness he could exploit. David started documenting everything with his hidden camera. He mapped out the location of every secret room and every piece of strange equipment. He identified patterns in their schedules and noted which humans had been replaced and when. The more he learned, the more urgent the situation became. Based on what he found, David estimated that hundreds of important people had already been replaced: politicians, military leaders, scientists, business executives. The beings were taking control of human society from the inside. But David also discovered their ultimate plan in a document he found in Dr. Rodriguez's private office. He learned that this was just the first phase. Once they had control of key positions in governments around the world, they would signal their home planet. A massive invasion fleet was waiting somewhere in space, ready to come to Earth once the planet was sufficiently weakened from within. The timeline was terrifying. According to the document, they planned to complete the infiltration within 6 months. After that, they would begin systematically removing the rest of humanity. The planet would be transformed into a new home for their dying race. David realized that he might be the only person on Earth who knew the truth. The beings had been so careful, so methodical in their approach, that no one suspected what was happening. They were winning a war that humanity didn't even know was being fought. But David had advantages too. His intelligence training had taught him how to gather information without being detected. His janitor disguise gave him access to places and conversations that no one else could reach. And most importantly, the beings underestimated him completely. David started planning his next moves carefully. He needed to gather more evidence, identify more of the replaced individuals, and find a way to contact someone in the government who hadn't been compromised. But he also needed to learn more about the beings' weaknesses and how their technology worked. As David finished his shift that night, he looked around the institute with new eyes. This wasn't just a research facility, it was the command center for an invasion that could destroy humanity. And somehow, a simple janitor who everyone ignored had become Earth's best hope for survival. The game was becoming more dangerous every day, but David was determined to play it to the end. He had spent 2 years perfecting his disguise as a harmless immigrant worker. Now it was time to use that disguise to save the world. But first, he needed to figure out exactly how many of these beings were already among us, and whether there was still time to stop what they had started. The fate of humanity might depend on how well a former spy could continue to pretend he was just a man with a mop. Dr. Rodriguez started giving David special jobs. At first, He thought it was just bad luck. Maybe she noticed he was always round late at night, so she figured he could handle extra work. But as weeks passed, David realized there was a pattern to these assignments. Dr. Rodriguez called to him one evening as he was cleaning near her office. "I have something special for you to do tonight." David looked up from his mop bucket and nodded. He had perfected his act over the years. He spoke slowly, used simple words, and always looked a little confused when people gave him complex instructions. "Yes, ma'am. What you need? There are some boxes in the basement storage room, room B12. They need to be taken to the incinerator and destroyed completely. Can you do that for me?" "Sure, I can do that. No problem." Dr. Rodriguez smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they think they're being clever. "Good. And David, this is very important. These boxes contain old research materials that are sensitive. We can't just throw them in the regular trash. They must be burned completely. Do you understand?" David nodded and shuffled his feet a little. "Yes, ma'am. Burn everything. I understand. Excellent. And David, this stays between us, okay? Don't mention this to anyone else." "Okay, I don't tell nobody." As Dr. Rodriguez walked away, David felt a chill run down his spine. This was the first time she had asked him to destroy something, and the way she emphasized that everything must be burned completely made him very suspicious. That night, David went to room B12. The boxes were heavy and sealed with tape that looked different from normal packing tape. It was thicker and had a strange metallic shine to it. David carefully loaded the boxes onto his cart and wheeled them toward the incinerator. But instead of burning them immediately, he took the cart to a storage closet where he wouldn't be interrupted. He opened the first box and immediately wished he hadn't. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. They showed what looked like medical procedures. But the subjects weren't quite human. Some had extra limbs, others had skin that looked wrong, and some had eyes that were too large or the wrong color. David's hands started shaking as he flipped through the images. At the bottom of the box were documents. Most were in that strange language he had seen before, but some were in English. They talked about genetic samples and adaptation procedures and replacement protocols. One document had a list of names with check marks next to them. David recognized some of the names. They were government officials and scientists from around the country. The second box contained small glass containers filled with what looked like tissue samples. Each container was labeled with a number and a date. David realized with horror that these might be human tissue samples. But why would Dr. Rodriguez want to destroy them? The third box was the worst. It contained what looked like recording devices. But they weren't like any technology David had ever seen. They were smooth and curved, almost organic looking. When he picked one up, it felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse slightly. David quickly repacked everything and wheeled the cart back to the incinerator. But instead of burning the boxes, he hid them in an unused storage room. He would need time to study everything properly. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Rodriguez gave him more special assignments. She asked him to clean a restricted laboratory that was normally off-limits. She had him dispose of more boxes of sensitive materials. She even gave him a key to a room in the basement that he had never seen before. Each assignment gave David more pieces of the puzzle. The restricted laboratory contained equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. There were machines that hummed with energy and tanks filled with strange liquids. The walls were covered with charts showing human anatomy, but with notes and modifications that didn't make sense. The basement room was even more disturbing. It looked like a communication center. There were screens showing locations around the world, and keyboards with symbols that weren't from any human language. David managed to take some photos with his hidden camera, but he was careful not to touch anything. The most shocking discovery came when David was disposing of another box of materials. Hidden among the documents was a personnel file with his own name on it, but the information inside was wrong. According to the file, David was born in a small town in Mexico and had never traveled outside the United States. It described him as having limited education and no family. David realized that Dr. Rodriguez had been researching him, but the information she had gathered was completely fake. Someone had created a false background for him, and Dr. Rodriguez believed it completely. She thought he was exactly what he appeared to be, a simple janitor with no education or connections. This gave David a terrible advantage. Dr. Rodriguez trusted him with sensitive tasks because she thought he was too simple to understand what he was seeing. She spoke freely around him because she didn't think he was smart enough to piece things together. She gave him access to restricted areas because she didn't consider him a threat. But David's biggest shock came when he found a document that mentioned his sister Lisa. She worked for the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. According to the document, she had been successfully replaced 3 months ago. There was a photo attached showing two women who looked identical. Both looked like his sister. David's hand shook as he read the details. The real Lisa had been taken during a business trip to Nevada. The replacement had been sent back to Washington to continue her work. The document noted that the replacement was performing adequately and had maintained all necessary relationships and responsibilities. David felt like he was going to be sick. His sister, his only family in America, had been replaced by some kind of copy, and he had been talking to the fake Lisa on the phone for months without realizing it. Now everything made sense. The strange materials, the secret laboratories, the communication equipment. Dr. Rodriguez and her group were replacing important people with copies. They were infiltrating the government and taking control from the inside. And David, the simple janitor that everyone ignored, was the only one who knew the truth. Dr. Rodriguez had been using him to clean up the evidence of her operations. She trusted him because she thought he was too stupid to understand what he was seeing. But David understood everything, and now he knew that time was running out. If they had already replaced his sister and other government officials, their plan was much further along than he had imagined. He needed to act fast, but he also needed to be careful. One wrong move, and he would end up like his sister, replaced and forgotten. As David finished his shift that night, he made a decision. He couldn't keep pretending to be helpless. He needed to use his real skills to stop what was happening. But first, he needed to figure out exactly how many people had been replaced, and whether it was already too late to save his sister and the others. The game was about to change, and Dr. Rodriguez had no idea that her simple janitor was about to become her worst nightmare. David knew he had to contact someone in the military after finding out about his sister. He couldn't just collect information anymore. People's lives were at stake. He remembered Colonel Thompson from his old intelligence days. If anyone would believe his crazy story, it would be him. Getting a message to Thompson wasn't easy. David couldn't use his home phone or computer. Too risky. Instead, he found an old payphone across town and made the call during his lunch break. The conversation was brief but intense. Thompson speaking. "Colonel, this is Agent Chen. I know. You think I'm dead, but I need help." There was a long pause. "Chen, where the hell have you been for 3 years? That's not important right now. I've discovered something big, really big. There's an invasion happening, but not the kind you'd expect." David quickly explained what he had found at the Research Institute. He told Thompson about the replacements, the strange technology, and the documents he had photographed. Thompson listened without interrupting. "Chen, this sounds insane. Are you sure about this? I'm sending you proof right now. Check your secure email in 10 minutes. And Thompson, they've already replaced people in the government. High-level people. You need to be very careful who you trust." David hung up and rushed to an internet cafe. He uploaded the most important photos and documents to Thompson's secure email account. Then he deleted everything from the computer and left. But David had made a mistake. He didn't know that Dr. Rodriguez had been monitoring all communications, going in and out of the local area. The aliens had technology that could track unusual patterns, and David's encrypted message had triggered their security systems. The next morning, David arrived at work to find the atmosphere completely different. Security guards were everywhere. Scientists were being questioned, Everyone looked nervous and scared. "What's happening?" David asked one of the day shift cleaners. "They think there's a spy," the cleaner whispered. "Someone's been stealing information. They're checking everyone's background again." David's heart sank. He had been so careful, but somehow they knew. He went about his cleaning duties as normally as possible, but he could feel eyes watching him. Several times, he noticed security guards following him from a distance. That afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez called him into her office. She wasn't alone. 2 other people were with her, a man and woman David had seen around the institute, but never paid much attention to. Now he realized they were probably aliens too. "David, please sit down," Dr. Rodriguez said. Her voice was friendly, but her eyes were cold. "We need to ask you some questions, okay, ma'am? Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all. But we think someone has been taking things that don't belong to them. Have you noticed anything unusual while you've been working?" David played his part perfectly. He looked confused and scratched his head. "Unusual? Like what?" "Maybe someone going through files or taking pictures where they shouldn't be." "No, ma'am. I just clean. I don't pay attention to that stuff." The woman leaned forward. "David, you've been working here for 2 years. You have access to many areas. Are you sure you haven't seen anything suspicious?" "I don't know what suspicious means," David said, trying to look embarrassed about his lack of education. Dr. Rodriguez exchanged glances with the others. "It means strange or wrong, like someone doing something they shouldn't be doing." "Oh, no, I don't think so. Should I tell you if I see something like that?" "Yes, definitely. In fact, David, we're going to give you a special job. We want you to keep an eye out for anything unusual. Can you do that for us?" David nodded eagerly. "Sure, I can do that. You want me to watch for bad people?" "Exactly. And David, if you help us catch this spy, there might be a bonus for you. Maybe even a promotion." After David left the office, he realized how close he had come to being caught. They suspected someone, but they still thought he was too simple to be the spy. His act had saved him, but barely. Over the next few days, David had to be incredibly careful. He continued his normal routines, but he could feel the aliens watching him more closely. He started noticing things he had missed before. Some of the security guards weren't human either. They moved with the same unnatural precision as Dr. Rodriguez. David also realized that his message to Thompson had been intercepted. The aliens kept mentioning external communications and military contacts. They knew someone had contacted the outside world, but they didn't know who. The situation got worse when David overheard a conversation between Dr. Rodriguez and her associates. They were planning to speed up their operations. The spy had made them nervous, and they wanted to complete their mission before anyone could. "Stop them. We need to eliminate the threat," the woman said. "Whoever is feeding information to the military must be dealt with," agreed. Dr. Rodriguez replied. "But we also need to accelerate the replacement program. If they're onto us, we need to get our people into position faster." David's blood ran cold. They were talking about replacing more people, and they wanted to eliminate him once they figured out who he was. He needed to find a way to contact Thompson again, but this time he had to be smarter about it. That night, David made a dangerous decision. He snuck into the communications center in the basement and planted a small device he had built from spare parts. It wasn't sophisticated, but it would let him monitor their communications and maybe even disrupt them when the time was right. As he was leaving the communications center, David heard footsteps in the hallway. He quickly hid behind a large machine and watched as the security guards walked past. They were speaking in that strange alien language, but David had learned enough to understand some of it. They were talking about him, not by name, but they were discussing the maintenance worker who had been acting suspiciously. They had noticed that he was always in the right place at the right time, and they were starting to wonder if it was just coincidence. David waited until they were gone, then carefully made his way back to the main floor. But as he rounded a corner, he came face to face with Dr. Rodriguez. She was standing in the hallway like she had been waiting for him. "David, what are you doing down here so late?" David's mind raced. I was cleaning the basement, ma'am. There was a spill in one of the storage rooms. Dr. Rodriguez looked at him for a long moment. I see. In which storage room was that? I think it was B7. Or maybe B8. I'm not good with numbers. Show me. David's heart was pounding, but he led Dr. Rodriguez to storage room B7. He quickly spilled some cleaning solution on the floor and started mopping it up. See? Big mess. I had to clean it up. Dr. Rodriguez watched him work, but David could tell she wasn't convinced. David, you've been working here for 2 years. Have you ever been curious about what we do here? No, ma'am. I just clean. I don't understand science stuff. But surely you must wonder sometimes, all these laboratories, all these experiments, doesn't it make you curious? David stopped mopping and looked at her with what he hoped was genuine confusion. I try not to think about things I don't understand. My mama always said curious people get in trouble. Dr. Rodriguez smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Your mama was a smart woman. Well, finish up here and go home. And David, be extra careful about security. We don't want any accidents. As David watched her walk away, he realized that his time was running out. Dr. Rodriguez was getting suspicious, and it was only a matter of time before she figured out who he really was. He needed to make his move soon, or he would end up like his sister, replaced and forgotten. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and David knew that the next few days would determine whether he could save humanity or become another casualty in an invasion that most people didn't even know was happening. David knew his time was up when he arrived at work and found Dr. Rodriguez waiting for him in the lobby. She wasn't alone. 4 security guards stood with her, and David could tell from their unnatural stillness that they weren't human either. David, Dr. Rodriguez said with a smile that didn't hide the coldness in her eyes. We need to have a conversation. Would you come with us, please? David looked around. There was nowhere to run, and too many people watching. He had to play his part one more time. Did I do something wrong? Ma'am, I've been working hard, I promise. Oh, I know you've been working very hard, she replied. Harder than anyone imagined. They escorted David to a conference room in the basement that he had never seen before. The walls were covered with screens showing locations around the world. David could see images of government buildings, military bases, and research facilities. On each screen, there were people he recognized from newspapers and television, senators, generals, scientists. But something was wrong with their eyes. They all had the same cold, empty look that Dr. Rodriguez had. Sit down, David, Dr. Rodriguez said, gesturing to a chair in the center of the room. Or should I say, Agent Chen? David's heart stopped, but he kept his expression confused. I don't understand. My name is David. Who's Agent Chen? Dr. Rodriguez laughed. You're very good at this act, I have to admit. You had me fooled for a long time. The simple janitor who couldn't understand complex ideas. The immigrant worker who just wanted to keep his head down and do his job. It was perfect. I really don't know what you're talking about, ma'am. Then let me explain. Dr. Rodriguez said, walking over to one of the screens. 3 nights ago, someone sent detailed information about our operations to Colonel Thompson at the Pentagon. Information that could only have come from someone with access to our most secure areas. David tried to look blank. I don't know any. Colonel Thompson? Of course you don't, but Agent Chen does. Agent Chen worked with Colonel Thompson for 5 years before he disappeared and was presumed dead. Agent Chen was one of the best intelligence analysts in his country's service. Before he had to run for his life, Dr. Rodriguez pressed a button, and David's real photograph appeared on the screen. It was from his old military file, showing him in uniform with all his medals and commendations. You see, David, we know exactly who you are. What we couldn't figure out was why you were hiding. As a janitor, at first, we thought you might be here to spy on us, but you seemed so simple, so harmless. We decided you were just a man trying to escape his past. David maintained his confused expression. I don't understand these pictures. That's not me. Stop lying, Dr. Rodriguez shouted, her calm mask finally slipping. We know you've been collecting evidence. We know you've been photographing our documents. We know you planted listening devices in our communications center." David looked genuinely shocked. "Listening devices? I don't know what those are." Dr. Rodriguez stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. "You're still doing it. Even now, with all the evidence in front of you, you're still pretending to be the simple janitor. I have to respect that level of commitment." She walked closer to David. "But here's what I don't understand. If you're really Agent Chen, why didn't you contact the authorities months ago? Why did you wait so long? Why did you let us get so close to completing our mission?" For the first time, David allowed a small smile to cross his face. "Because I wanted to understand your mission completely. I wanted to know every detail of your plan before I stopped it." Dr. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "So you admit it. You are Agent Chen." "I am," David said, his voice completely different now. Gone was the simple accent and slow speech. "And I know everything about your operation. Every person you've replaced, every facility you've infiltrated, every weakness in your plan. It doesn't matter what you know," Dr. Rodriguez said. "It's too late. Our people are already in position. The final phase begins tonight." David shook his head. "No, it doesn't. You see, while you were watching me and trying to figure out who I was learning about you. I know that your shape-shifting technology fails when exposed to a specific frequency. I know that your communication system relies on quantum entanglement that can be disrupted. And I know that your entire operation falls apart if the command structure is compromised." Dr. Rodriguez looked uncertain for the first time. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. "This is a frequency generator. One press of this button, and every alien in this building will lose their human appearance. Your own people won't even recognize you. The guards will stop you before you can use it." David looked at the security guards standing around the room. "You mean these guards? The ones who are about to lose their disguises?" He pressed the button. Immediately, a high-pitched whine filled the room. The security guards began convulsing, their human forms flickering and changing. Within seconds, they had transformed into something that looked like a cross between a human and a lizard. With gray skin and large black eyes, Dr. Rodriguez herself was changing too. Her perfect human features melted away, revealing the same gray skin and black eyes. She was taller than she appeared as a human, with long fingers that ended in claws. Impossible. She hissed in a voice that no longer sounded human. "How did you know about the frequency?" "I've been studying your technology for 2 years," David said calmly. "Every device you asked me to destroy, I studied first. Every document you had me burn, I read and copied. You trusted me with your secrets because you thought I was too stupid to understand them." The alien that had been Dr. Rodriguez looked around the room in panic. Her guards were writhing on the floor, unable to maintain any form. "This changes nothing. Our people around the world will continue the mission." "No, they won't," David said, "because I've been broadcasting this frequency through your own communication system. Every alien on Earth just lost their disguise simultaneously. Right now, your replaced government officials are being exposed on live television. Your infiltrators are being arrested. Your entire invasion force is being rounded up." David pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. News reports were flooding in from around the world. Senator reveals strange appearance during live interview. Military general transforms on camera. Scientists worldwide demand answers about shape-shifting phenomenon. The alien queen stared at the phone in horror. How did you access our communication system? "You gave me the access codes yourself," David said. "Every time you sent me to destroy evidence, you were actually giving me pieces of your technology to study. Every special assignment was a chance for me to learn more about your systems. You thought you were using me, but I was using you. But the listening devices we found were decoys. I wanted you to think you had discovered my surveillance. While you were looking for those obvious devices, you missed the real ones. I've been recording everything for months." The alien queen's shoulders sagged in defeat. "You used our own arrogance against us. We underestimated humans because we thought you were inferior. You underestimated me specifically because you thought I was inferior." David corrected. Your prejudice made you blind to the truth. You saw what you expected to see, a simple immigrant worker who couldn't possibly threaten your superior race. Outside the room, David could hear sirens approaching. Colonel Thompson and his team were arriving, right on schedule. The invasion was over before most humans even knew it had begun. The irony, David said as he heard footsteps in the hallway, is that you were partially right. I'm just a janitor. I do clean things up. I just clean up bigger messes than you. Realized as the military team burst through the door, David looked at the defeated alien queen. You thought I was just a fool, but sometimes the person you ignore is the one who sees everything. The alien invasion that could have enslaved humanity was stopped by a man with a mop and bucket who knew that sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight.